by default something that is good for the audience and the target beneficiary groups, and that takes into account all of the important points when it comes to making sure that we don't make people less vulnerable when using technology. So, and I thought of a few things that I believe they are factory settings when you develop digital tools. I wrote here that at least in public service, which is civil society and public administration, but I do believe that this should be something that has to be adopted in technology at large. So the first thing, I'm pretty sure it's a bit too tiny now that I look at this screen. So having the right expertise in the room, in every room, and be aware that everything is data. So as we started this conversation, wondering what a digital ethicist should look like, and should the skill set be actually split among different roles when you build technology, yes, you should definitely have a component of taking care of data and privacy and in human rights in absolutely every single member of a team that develops technology. However, you should have that sort of designated person. We're going to speak about DPOs a bit later in this conversation, but we should have a designated person that is actually in charge in making sure that whatever we put out there as builders, we make sure that we respect all the good principles. The second part is understanding that every user is a vulnerable user in today's context. The internet, as we know it today, is quite a jungle for everybody who's basically not a developer or somebody that doesn't work in the tech industry. We have a lot of vulnerable groups, and here we're not just referring to people who come from vulnerable communities that have just discovered the internet recently and they are vulnerable to all the online threats and do not really understand what happens to the data they provide or they input in a tool to get some services. We're also talking about the ones that provide the services themselves. So if we're looking at governments, if we're looking at people who work in public service and provide tools and provide other benefits for general citizens, these users need to be protected as well. So when we're talking about the person you meet at the registration desk when you go to your local city hall, that's a user of technology, and they're extremely vulnerable as well. And we need to start preparing them and helping them understand what the internet looks like, what technology looks like, and what can be the consequences of using a technology poorly or maybe not using it with all the good intentions, however, not making sure that you understand what the consequences in the long run are. Third is training the right professionals. So I myself am a user experience designer by profession, and the country that I'm coming from, which is Romania, doesn't even recognize this job. So we are the architects of the solutions that we're putting out there. We're working with the development teams. We understand the user and its needs, and we design the requirements for that tool. However, we are not trained into understanding properly how we work with data, what are the consequences of the instruments that we're putting out there. So I think it's really important to start introducing and making it part of the formal education for the people who are the architects of the software we're using today to understand what are the long-term consequences of working with these tools and what it means for the end user. Fourth, clear mandatory standards. We're in a bit of a wild west now in public service. We have some guidelines, we have some recommendations, we have some great conferences where we meet and we keep telling each other, hey, it's not that great, it's kind of bad with everything that's going on online. However, we need to make a more strategic move in bringing data into bringing clear standards into public service, and by public service here, I also include civil society. If there's another actor aside governments that do have the largest footprint in working with, especially with vulnerable populations and with the least digitally literate groups, that's civil society. And at this point in time, there is no concrete initiative in bringing standards into the technology built in the public space from the civil society's perspective. Fifth, embedded practices. And this ties up with standards quite a lot, because this should be sort of, when you get your public procurement requirements, when you're going as a government to buy technology from any type of provider, be it civic, nonprofit, or be it a private company, you should have a set of embedded standards and embedded practices in that procurement file so that the company has to abide by those specific rules when they provide technology to the government. Last but not least, again, understand that understand that the digital service providers are users as well, and I cannot stress this enough. While we, for instance, we've been providing technology for governments in different spaces, either participatory budgeting tools or instruments for managing taxes, and a lot of things that have to deal with the citizen himself and direct public service. While we strive to put in every single data protection regulation in place and make sure that we think with the end user in mind and making sure that we protect everybody from all the threats that we see each and every day, the moment that the tool got into the public municipality, the lady who's managing the tool has put a post-it with the password on her computer just in case anybody needs it. So we're talking about also bringing in the user who provides the service, and bringing him in on board and trying to get him to understand what working with this information means, both for the institution as well as for the citizen. So just to sum it up, I'd like to have as much time as possible for questions. I think that we need to start looking into training the right professionals and training the key professionals that have a say in how a product is designed and how it's going to be used in the field. And second, we should definitely not forget about the need for agreeing what is the minimum viable level of standards in order to consider that the technology we put out there, allegedly for good, is actually doing its job in the field. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olivia, also for staying very well within time and with such a clear message. And we'll move on to Ivonne.
Hello, I'm Ivonne Jansen. I work at the province of Zuid-Holland, the regional authority in the Netherlands. And I would identify as a digital ethicist, maybe. Not exactly being clear on what it is, but what makes me a digital ethicist, I was thinking about that. And one of the things is that, well, I have a background in the arts. I think for me that has a clear relation with being a critical thinker. I've had both experience in commercial IT development and in a digital civil society space. That's how I know Olivia as well. And I know a lot about methods to work with society in the digital sphere. For instance, I've done a lot on the topic of citizen science. And this was all before I moved to government. So I've been working at the province for 4 years now. And my role is full-time about ethics. It's strategic advisor on technology, society, and ethics. The ethics was added later, even though the description at the time of the vacancy was ethics. My director said, well, maybe not put ethics right away in the tagline, so keep it under wraps a bit, which was weird because my executive, the provincial executives, was constantly promoting me as the provincial ethicist, so that was a bit strange. But now I can call myself ethicist as well. But I don't have a background in ethics, so that is, I think, interesting. I do have a husband that's a philosopher, so maybe that helps. So I'm going to talk about 5 things that I'm doing in my daily job that I think makes me a digital ethicist. And the first is it's very important to continually be asking questions. So I'm creating room in the organization for people to ask more questions. We have different methods to do that. Luckily, a lot of new methods have emerged in the past couple of years, but I have a strong co-creation background myself, so it's been always easy for me to set up the spaces where you can talk about these things. Trying to avoid the word ethics. I'm actually surprised so many people showed up, because my experience is if you say you're going to do something on ethics, then nobody comes. So the questions at the top are the questions that my colleagues are coming with. So I think it's very important to create room for them to talk about that in a safe sphere. At the same time, I always try to involve people outside of our own organizations, civil society organizations, other type of stakeholders as well, to get their perspectives. For myself, the questions are always about, and especially now, again, I would say, with the emergence of ChatGPT, I'm constantly sort of fighting against the techno-optimism that these type of technologies seem to awaken in people. So it's the narrative, the dominant narrative is this is going to solve everything, and also in terms of open government, and we're going to be able to access all of our files, which are a total mess, of course, and this is going to solve that entire problem. So constantly fighting against this techno-optimistic perspective, which is the norm. I also try to push for narrative. So we tend to think technology is going to solve a problem. At least, that's part of that techno-optimism as well. And then opening up the conversation to talk about, well, is this technology really needed? How would you do this if you didn't have this technology? There are so many factors, other factors, societal factors, ecological factors that you can work with. Besides, going to data or going to a drone or whatever. And raising awareness about the fact that, yes, you might be using a certain type of data or a certain type of technology, but it's going to be more work to change the processes and regulations around that technology, or maybe just that's even the wrong phrasing, because it's not around the technology, but you have a problem, you try to fix it, technology is going to be part of that, but changing the process and regulation to match this technology that's doing a new thing is going to be equally challenging. And then, it seems so obvious, but keeping the focus on the fact that we are doing this for people, and that the tech is not the central thing. For instance, I'm working now with an aviation team in the authority. They are creating drone corridors over the region. So how are drones going to fly? There's new legislation coming. There's all type of new drones coming, and they want to. They feel that this is going to impact society a lot, but they are so focused on making it possible that they don't really know how to refocus on people again. So how this is going to affect the people. So that's interesting. So a lot of, I think it's about refocusing the conversation. If you look at any type of technology document or documentation, it's all about IT control, sourcing, portfolio management, IT governance, and then shifting it to talking about open government, about privacy, accessibility, open source. So also introducing these new type of words to talk about technology. Finding political drivers is also very important. Part of my work, I am not part of the technology department, I'm part of the policy department, and I think that's been my luck from the start. So I talked to the executives as well, and only the first one actually happened. My team has a goal to make more things political, to get more decision-making on different type of technology. So the first one has happened. The second one I'm preparing at the moment. So to stop using location data from, this arised from a specific supplier that creates location data from people, and the organization itself collects it through these third-party consent type of things. Doing something on that. I think, I'm going to leave it at that. But especially this whole new wave of legislation that is coming up is definitely helping this. So helping to pluck out those things that I know my provincial executive will be susceptible for, find interesting to create some type of decision on. And then, of course, always working on alternative, creating wins. So I did, the first year I was there, we did a festival on digital freedom. Creating guides. So these are all things that you can also create political, momentum on. I we were the first government body to become a member of the Foundation for Public Code. We are still the only member of the Foundation for Public Code, so that's a bit but it's a organization promoting open source in Europe. They are located in the Netherlands, and I would urge you all to look at it. They created a great standard for public code. Working on an algorithm register, we were in the first batch of governments to actually open up documentation on the algorithms we're using. But before that happened, I actually was also one of the initiators of the Dutch Algorithm Transparency Standard. So I was part of the project that went before that said, well, maybe we shouldn't all be now going to suppliers and buying, procuring different systems where we can document stuff about our algorithms, but we should first work on a standard that, you know, now it's still a bit of a greenfield, and get as many people involved in that as possible, as many other ethicist-minded people in government. And that actually worked, so this is now adopted on a national level. Things I'm working on now that are not there yet. So I want to create a sort of benchmark for a digital society and open government, where it's easy for the states, provincial and society as a whole to evaluate how we're doing on specific topics. This is going to be a multiple-year project where it's all about finding the indicators that say something about these different aspects in terms of open government and digital society. So an accessibility one is easy. There's already a national indicator for that where it's a bit dubious how it's reported, but there's something we can refer to. But for instance, if you look at AI, what's going to be the indicators there? Polis implementation, so it's a really interesting open source deliberation software where and doing it's sort of the same. I'm at the same stage where I was with the whole algorithm standard project, where we're still at the beginning, and it's going to be about setting some type of default implementation and then getting as many people across the board involved to start giving input and start adopting this way of working. And yeah, last one, I think maybe it's just in the Netherlands, but saying you're an activist in government is sort of a no-go in my experience. But I think there are a lot of secret activists in government, so especially now in the whole climate change sphere. But there are a lot of digital activists as well, and I know them. I know a lot of them. So in my spare time, I'm also a board member of Code for NL. It's a Dutch community of I would say technical developers working with or from government. So that helps me source a lot of ideas. So for instance, this Polis, I've been experimenting with Polis 3 years ago already in this community. It helps me with this algorithm standard, getting input from more of the developer community side. So this is a great resource for me, and to find these interesting things that I can bring into my work. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Aphra, Kerr, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the previous speakers for those great examples. So my name is Aphra Kerr. I'm an academic full-time researcher and lecturer in Maynooth University, about 30k west of Dublin in Ireland. And I'm co-PI in the ADAPT Centre, which is a national research centre on AI and digital content technologies. So that's by ways of kind of introducing. And of course, what's interesting for us when we think about digital ethics is we've been having this debate now in Europe, probably since the high-level ethics group on AI, but we've really started to see members of this community and others start to document real harms on the ground from the application of some of the first kind of AIs and digital technologies. And so this has really focused us and focused our attention on starting to think about how can we do things better? How do we need to take what's this really high-level debate and some of the legal principles, but how do we work with people who are developing these technologies and applying them to really change practice on the ground? Given that I'm from Ireland, you know that the law moves somewhat slowly, and you'll know how long it took for this particular decision for Meta and Facebook to be made, which of course will be appealed as well. So this is one route, and it's an important route, but I think we need to look at other potentials and other ways of doing things. And so in the work that we have been doing, we've been looking at public expectations around the governance of AI, and it certainly is, I mean, they're optimistic that we are able to regulate things, which I think is good. I'm not sure I particularly share it all. They're particularly optimistic in the Irish context that the European Commission public bodies will be able to govern and regulate AI in the public interest. And so there really is a kind of democratic mandate to mitigate the harms and to fulfill that kind of trust level, to fulfill the mandate that elected representatives and other bodies have. But we're starting to see some gaps, perhaps, and some worries in what even is being planned at the European and national levels around governing AI. What does it mean from particular sectors, for example, from health? My own background, media and communication, what are the issues there? When we see such challenges around disinformation, around elections, right, about fundamental parts of our democracies. So within our ADAPT Research Centre, we've been working and using different methods. Now, primarily ADAPT has a lot of computer scientists and engineers doing really hardcore research and helping me to understand really how does machine learning work, how do these different technologies work. So I've been going through an education process as somebody coming from social science who's, I think, pretty well versed in both my training and my research in understanding both the ethical and the social challenges of applying digital technologies. We've been doing some, I guess you might call them citizen participation events around discussing AI, what are the fears and concerns. And whatever about that methodology for the public citizens, one of the most important things we've learned is that for our computer scientists and our engineering students, PhDs, postdocs, being involved in these events often is one of the first opportunities they have to discuss some of these issues. Coming out of their standard undergraduate training, they have not had much exposure to ethics and social science and things. Now, this obviously varies country to country, but clearly just doing one module, and maybe doing one module at a very high level of principles, will not be sufficient to do what we need to do in terms of training and researching the future generations of people who are going to be designing and deploying AI systems. And we also know that despite like some oversight and NGOs and governing standards bodies, we see a lot happening at different levels. It's a very complex development chain, production chain, developing an AI system. You have the data providers, you have the people then maybe model developers, you have application developers, and then we have users which may be complex public sector bodies, or they may be small digital SMEs. So where and who and when can we intervene in these processes? So it was very interesting for me to get involved in this proposal that we started to develop, where we started to say, okay, we have things happening at the high level in principles and codes and practices. We have some of our computer science degrees now adding in modules and really making computer scientists and people aware of some of the issues. What else do we need to do? And we've started in ADAPT to work with Dublin City Council, another complex public sector body with, operating across a population of about 1.5 million people. They have a couple of small digital divisions within that, but most people are going about their day-to-day, administering planning and all of the different things that the public sector bodies do, and have no engagement particularly with ethical and social issues of AI and big data. But they do have an awful lot of companies coming to sell them technologies or to offer them free software to run systems for the city. So they're in this complex situation where they don't really have the knowledge and the resources to do the procurement in the best public interest, and they're being offered proprietary software for a time for free, but of course then the data will be locked into and sitting on proprietary software. So we've been working with them now to introduce new terminology, new focus around digital rights, around ethics, around what are the sorts of questions we can build into thinking about this. When we did the needs analysis for this proposal, it was interesting that we did a very short, small survey. We hope to do a bigger one if we're funded. That the people who are starting to worry and consider and think about ethics were actually in all sorts of different areas. Yes, of course, the data protection people, but the CEOs were thinking about them. And nearly all of the people who responded to our survey had no formal training, had no access particularly to training, except maybe free training, and it was sometimes unaccredited, and they had to fit it in around their day jobs. So there will be a challenge, right, about actually training and upgrading people in these organizations to see how best to work in the public interest. So as we moved on to doing this, these are kind of the conclusions, and then I'm going to wrap up, is as we looked at developing this proposal, there clearly is a need in these complex organizations for people to develop their skills and their knowledge and competencies in this area. So we started to think about the fact that this is definitely, we're not designing one person who will be a digital ethicist. Of course, this is going to be a shared challenge for organizations. But there certainly should be some people whose job it is to look at the complexity of these projects and to monitor post-implementation. What we don't want is people just to think there's a research ethics point at the beginning of a project, and perhaps that there is a procurement stage, and then there's nothing to be done afterwards. That's not how it works, right? These trainings, these technologies are updated and trained and retrained all of the time. So this has to be a challenge that's addressed throughout the life cycle of the technologies and post-implementation. Right? It is also then something I think that we can, as educators and researchers, we need to be thinking about, well, what then are the skills and when do we offer this training and how? We haven't fully developed this, but I think we learned a lot by writing this proposal. And then finally, and we're seeing some really interesting social science research coming out about the challenges in complex organizations, particularly public sector organizations, in actually changing organizational cultures to really embed these challenges and really take them seriously. And it's amazing to see what's happening in some of my colleagues here, what they're doing in their organizations. That's it. Thank you.
So, good morning, everyone. Is this thing on? Test, test, test.
Yes.
Hello. Hello, my name is Joost Gerritsen. I'm a lawyer from the Netherlands. I own my own law firm called Legal Beetle. And I'm also the co-founder of the Dutch Association for AI Lawyers. And last but not least, I founded DG Beetle. It's an online portal where you can find data protection related documents. So, not surprisingly, my perspective is that of a legal one. And I want to answer the question, can digital ethicists steer effective implementation of policy? It's a big question, so let's dissect it into a few small ones. To start, what does the law say about digital ethicists? That term is nowhere to be found in any of the laws from Brussels, but they describe similar roles. Perhaps you heard of the GDPR. Happy anniversary, by the way, with the 5th year of the GDPR. As you know, the GDPR introduces the role of the data protection officer or establishes it. The DPO advises organizations and its employees on data protection. But we also have the proposed AI Act. And the AI Act doesn't mention something like an AI compliance officer, But if you have read the Act, then you will know that there are a lot of things you have to think about, mandatory instructions when you're going to build or implement AI systems. So I think it's safe to say that if you develop or implement high-risk AI systems, you will need to designate a person which you can call an AI Act compliance officer. And we also have the DSA, or the Digital Services Act. That act contains rules for online intermediaries and platforms, and it specifically mentions compliance officers, and those are mandatory if you operate so-called VLOPs, very large online platforms. Think of Amazon, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, etc., the big ones. But you would also need to designate a compliance officer when you own a very large search engine. And I can only think of two, Google and Bing. So that's only two parties who have to consider that role. And let's go to another smaller question. How ethical should organizations be according to the law? Well, the term ethics or ethical, the same story. You cannot find it anywhere in the law itself. Perhaps in some considerations or in the explanatory memorandum, but not in the articles of the law. No, instead, the legislator likes to refer to fundamental rights and related terms such as fairness. And in the GDPR, the AI Act and the Digital Services Act, you see all kinds of articles that mention fundamental rights. For instance, as part of the GDPR, if you are going to implement or use new technologies that pose a high risk to people, then you have to conduct a data protection impact assessment. And part of that assessment is that you have to check to what extent your AI system will have an impact on the rights and freedoms of people. So that's not only data protection, but also other fundamental rights, such as the right to not to be discriminated against, the right to freedom of expression, right to the freedom of religion, etc. The AI Act, and when it comes to digital ethicists, the DPO, that person has a role when you are conducting such an impact assessment. The DPO advises on the procedure and gives tips or hints to the organization, saying things like, hey, I propose you do this and that to mitigate the risks in relation to fundamental rights. So that's an important role for the DPO or digital ethicist, so to speak. And we also have the AI Act. The AI Act wants the development and the implementation of safe AI, and safe means safe in terms of health, safety, and fundamental rights. And again, if you read the AI Act, there are some links with fundamental rights. For instance, if you develop a high-risk AI system, you have to describe and thus think about the system's training procedures, but also the potential discriminatory effects of your AI system. Also, if you develop high-risk AI systems, you have to document foreseeable unintended outcomes and sources of potential harm of the AI system, and that also includes risks to fundamental rights. And you not only identify those risks, but you also describe them as part of the manual that accompanies the AI system. And I can imagine that would be something for a digital ethicist or AI Act compliance officer who organizes all those considerations regarding fundamental rights. And yeah, that can be a really big task given the complexity of the subject. Last but not least, we have the Digital Services Act again. Like I said, in some cases you have to install compliance officers. And they have to identify risks regarding the organization's systems. So that's really broad, but the DSA mentions that it also includes algorithmic systems, so AI systems. You have to identify the risks of those systems in relation, again, to actual or foreseeable negative effects on fundamental rights. So, according to the law, you have to be ethical to a certain extent if you implement AI systems, simply because the law demands that you think about the fundamental rights impact of those systems. But how do those legal principles go about in practice? How do people with an ethical role manage when they are working for an organization that implements AI? Do organizations even listen to data protection officers or legal advisors? Welcome to the story of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I can give you a few examples where organizations did or did not listen to their digital ethicists. So let's start with the good. Sometimes, or in my opinion, most of the time, when DPOs raise the alarm about the potential harmful impacts of an AI, organizations listen to them because they are afraid of their good reputation, and they do not want a public fuzz about an AI system which is bad for society. So most of the time, the digital ethicist is respected. And there's an example from the Netherlands where the Dutch military conducted social media monitoring. They researched Dutch citizens, and maybe if you hear that, hopefully you'll think, hey, that's strange. What does the military do researching us? Shouldn't they be researching the enemy? And indeed, that was outside the scope of their powers, and the Dutch military DPO raised the alarm, and I think it's a good example where the responsible minister reacted promptly and adequately, and he said, yeah, this is totally wrong, and we're going to change our procedures. So they listened to the DPO. So far, so good. Now the bad. Unfortunately, there are a lot of examples. Recently, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it became known that it used an algorithm that can encourage discriminatory practices when assessing visa applications. Usually this was done assessing a visa application from someone who wanted to migrate to the Netherlands. This was done at the Dutch embassy, but now this is part of a big digital system. Unfortunately, it didn't go well. For the assessment, the officials used an algorithm which advised them to perform a visa application, either a brief visa assessment or a more extensive one. And that advice from the algorithm was based, among others, on nationality, gender, age, and place of application. And the DPO, the data protection officer, noticed that this algorithm encouraged discriminatory behavior because it automatically labeled young men from Suriname, which is a former colony of the Netherlands, as people who should have been part of the extensive assessment. And extensive means that the time it will take before you will granted a visa, it will take very long, and chances are high you are not getting them. This was known thanks to a news article, and the DPO he left in discontent because the ministry didn't listen to him, and the Dutch DPA, the Data Protection Authority, actually summoned the responsible minister in person. I'm not sure if he actually came over to the office, but that was the idea, to explain himself. Why did this happen, and why didn't you listen to the data protection officer? So it's a bad example or at least the example shows a bad behavior, a DPO doing the good thing, raising the alarm, but was ignored by his employer. And now, if you think things cannot get any worse, yes, they can, unfortunately. Time for the ugly. I refer, of course, to the Dutch child benefits scandal. A lot of things happened as part of the scandal, so I will tell you the following aspect of it. So years ago, the Dutch tax authority created an algorithm. Well, actually, it was a risk profile system. And it tried to assess individuals who applied for childcare benefits. So in the Netherlands, you can get those benefits if you meet certain conditions. The algorithm or the profiling system was based on several aspects. For instance, if you had a foreign-sounding name, whatever that may be, or a dual nationality, the algorithm would raise a red flag and say, hey, this is a potential fraudster. Dear official, do not send any money to this person because this is potential fraud. Yeah, as a result, I mean, this went wrong, obviously. Thousands of families were subjected to scrutiny, falsely accused of fraud, and were summoned to pay back the received childcare benefits, while they were totally entitled to receive them. The consequences were really dire for those families. They lost their money. They had to pay it back to the Dutch tax authority. A lot of them went into structural poverty, debt. There are also examples of broken marriages, people losing their job. Someone even committed suicide because the situation was so difficult that he saw no other way. And thousands of children were placed into child custody because there were so many negative financial consequences that in some cases the judge, or some cases, thousands of cases, the judge thought, oh, this child is in an unsafe environment, we should place him somewhere else at a foster family, for instance. So parents even lost their children over this algorithm. But did you know that in 2017 there was a legal advisor working for the Dutch tax authority? She warned her bosses about this, but she was ignored and she didn't receive any support from them. So I think this is a really ugly situation. It's still going on. The parents, a lot of them still haven't received any financial compensation. And I think if we had listened to that person, to the legal advisor, a lot of tragedy could have been spared. So far the ugly side of being a digital ethicist. Let's wrap up answering or trying to answer the main question. Can digital ethicists steer effective implementation of policy? Yes, they can. I think so. However, their position has to be properly embedded into the organization as an independent, impartial person working for the organization, and he or she should be respected. I don't think that person should be a single contact point, because I think that entails the risk of management outsourcing the important topic of ethics. They say, okay, this is our digital ethicist officer. You go ahead and give us the green light, and if it's green lit, then everything is fine, right? No, ethics should be something we should all care about and think about, including the higher management. To wrap up, I think the digital ethicist should be a person who understands fundamental rights, because that's what the law demands, and organizes ethical behavior within all levels of his or her organization. In any case, the digital ethicist should not be ignored. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joost. What I would like to do now is ask 4 questions to our panelists, and then we will have time for questions from the audience as well. So my first question was for Olivia. Yeah, you've been talking a lot about a sector that is already doing good. How does this sector feel about digital ethics as a source of innovation?
A source of innovation. So I have an issue with the word innovation because it means so many different things. So if we look at I don't know, the Netherlands, we're looking at algorithms, looking at how we improve the systems we already have and that are already working. If we're looking at a country like Romania, innovation can be a Google form in many of the cases. So looking at the public sector, yes, we all start with from the premise that we're supposed to implement software or technologies that in general will bring benefits to the most vulnerable of citizens. However, I think that we need to also look into even if we're building a very basic tool, this doesn't mean we don't need to also speed up in going through all the phases that all the other societies have gone through at this point and sort of embed it from the get-go. The digital ethicist, from my perspective, is the person that can bring a lot of innovation in how we handle and how we build infrastructure and systems. How do different systems communicate with each other? Because we've built a lot of islands of technology. We've built a system for this, a system for that, and now currently we're bringing them together and having data communicate. And I think this is also an area where innovation should definitely play a part and look into how do we build enough bridges between existing systems that are from the get-go really, really properly built. Last but not least, I think if there's one place where we definitely need to look into is training. And I think I'm sharing the same thought as my fellow panelists, that we need to bring digital ethicism in each and every person that is involved in providing public service and putting technology out there for the end user, rather than putting the spotlight on that one DPO, that one person that needs to give the green light on, is this properly built or not? Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Then for Yvonne, I have a very existential question, but that's all right because your husband is a philosopher, so he can help you with your existential crisis. Can digital ethicists really help steer effective implementation of policies for more ethical technologies?
Yes. Yes, but yeah, the thing is, I was positioned in the policy department, and I think that is, that was the saving grace in order to be doing a lot of things that I'm doing. So I have a lot of leeway in proposing my own projects, doing my own research. We now even have a team. So in the past 2 years ago, we created a digital policy team within the policy department, which has a specialist on open government and somebody more in the policy area, supporting our managing director, and somebody besides me that's doing a lot of the actual dialogue work around ethics. So going, talking with everybody, seeing if they have a moral question that they would like to discuss, setting up the necessary spaces to discuss them. That's a lot of work. She also, for instance, did a lot of work in actually doing interviews. She had to do, I don't know how many interviews to get 5 algorithms in our algorithm register. We have a list. She created a list of about 100 algorithms we are using which is not everything yet, but just the work of getting these 5, fully described with the proper mandates, etc., is already so much work, and now doing the work of getting that embedded into a structure where algorithms will be documented by default. That's actually even harder. But yeah, it's making it being positioned in this policy department is making it possible to act on different levels. So on the one hand, I can work with other policymakers. I can work with people in more of the execution of creating data systems, creating buying and procuring systems. And I can talk to the management and our executive body. But, you know, I'm just one person. So there's so much to do. And since this year, we have formalized it into an ethical think tank. We come together 4 times a year. There's a book club attached, and that's also helping. So I now have this pool of people around me of about 30 people, 40 people that know all about these dialogue methods, that understand the policies that I'm working on, that bring interesting potential decision making. How do you say, items or things that can be brought to the executives for official policy decisions. They bring that to me, so that's already helping a lot. Yeah.
Okay, great. Aphra and Joost, I've taken your questions together so that we have time for the audience to ask their questions as well. So part of the question was, what are the problems we will solve with digital ethicists education? And the other part of the question is, what are other things we need besides education to solve these challenges? Ladies first.
Okay, well, I think we probably have to solve some challenges within education before we solve the other challenges outside. Because depending on the educational culture and structures, even doing interdisciplinary programs can be challenging. Then actually figuring out how to get the disciplines and the people with different disciplinary training to be able to communicate with each other, have the right kinds of bridging people who can speak between the disciplines, and then the right kind of boundary objects that they can use to communicate with each other, and then getting them to collaborate and learn from people, external organizations. So I think I can only say we're at the moment trying to solve how to do these programs within education. But what I do see as an opportunity is actually this demand that we're seeing from organizations who want to work with us and are going to help us to identify, well, what are the core skills and competencies? So maybe all together we can do this.
And the second part of the question, if I remember correctly, is what should we do besides education, right? Well, when I think of the examples I've given under the moniker the good, the bad, and the ugly, the bad and the ugly examples can be summed up as DPOs or legal advisors doing their work well, but they got ignored and perhaps even got disrespected. So what do the digital ethicists, what can they learn from that is that they need to organize themselves to earn respect and to avoid of being ignored. Why organizing yourself? Well, as a lawyer, I think digital ethicists can learn from us, because lawyers, they have been organizing themselves for years and years with success. I mean, we have our own statute in law. Hopefully we are respected, at least by our clients. But if you ignore us, then you have some explaining to do. And right now, it's too easy for organizations to ignore either DPOs or digital ethicists for that matter. And I think that needs to change. And you can change that by organizing yourself, making yourself known. After the coffee break, I noticed in the program there is the Federation of International Data Protection Officers hosting a panel. But where is the International Federation of Digital Ethicists? It's needed because you can show the world and your employer, hey, I'm a member of this federation, and that means that we have our own code of conduct, and you cannot ignore me, because if you do, well, lawyers, for instance, if I have an issue, would have had an issue, I can go to the dean, which is like our local leader of lawyers, and discuss the matter with him. And we have like escalation, and we have our own form of regulation. All these measures in place to ensure that we are taken seriously. And I think digital ethicists can learn from us, from lawyers. Instead of only doing their work well, they can actually implement their good work in the organizations.
Thank you, Joost. Okay, then we can go for questions from the audience. I think there's a mic over there. If you can tell us who you are before asking your question, that would be great. You can go second.
Hello, thank you for a very interesting panel. I had a lot to identify with all of you. I studied mathematics, computer science, philosophy. I'm also married to a philosopher. I am soon to be program director of the Advanced Masters of Law and Digital Technologies in the Leiden Law School. So a lot of what you said rings very true to me. Now let me try to organize my thoughts. So I'm really working very hard to try and fix things in education, also on the computer science side, because I've gone through that experience. I left the discipline of computer science because there wasn't enough room for these discussions, but in my current position, I'm trying to go back into also computer science education to create more room you. I had a question mostly about what struck me as very interesting is that you, Yvonne, you stressed that it's such a blessing to be in the policy department, and then you, Olivia, talking from more of a development perspective. And I was wondering, there's two sides of ethical dilemmas. Is it about something that's in the technology? Is it about something in the way that it's used? Can you reflect a little bit on your role in the policy side? Is it effective because you focus in your environment mostly on use and implementation? That doesn't solve the problems that might be built in the development side of things. So Olivia, can you reflect a little bit on what you think are the effective measures that we can take on the development side of things? And there's a lot more I want to say, but there's also more people.
Thank you for your question.
So on the development side of things, there's a lot of leading by example. So starting to bring from a very sort of remote group of people who are building in the public space. And whenever you put it out there, you also bring together both the administrator, which is usually a public institution or a civil society organization, and the user, and saying, why is this piece of technology better than all of the other ones? Because it's not just about functionality. Second, doing a lot of advocacy and working with the decision makers and getting them to understand exactly what are the things that should be embedded in everything that is built in the public space, and it's supposed to take care of the user. So we do a lot of hand-holding from this perspective, and we always start, and this has proven to be quite effective, we start from the ground up. So we start initially with the internal institutional user, and we turn them into internal ambassadors of doing things right. And this builds up. It's a very long-term game. However, this really has gotten us to the point where we managed to introduce the concept of open source in public institutions in a very closed and corrupt state when it comes to public procurement in terms of large technology development contracts. And also bringing the need for standards and interoperability levels, and also pushing a lot from like what the EU requires and pushes towards the member states in terms of interconnectedness between systems. Last but not least, we have started the first program of user experience design for public service that has an entire module in formal education in the social sciences department, though not in the computer. This is the next step to go also into the polytechnic institutes. And we're training young people that would go and be those product managers and UX designers within public institutions that then will have a say in building proper ethical technology. So it's a long game, and I hope I've answered. Really happy to continue the conversation after.
I do want to quickly comment on this as well, because I don't have a policy background. So I am actually, in the ideal world, I would be situated in a technological department, INA, informatisering, automatisering, CIO department. And I would be creating policy from there. But traditionally, or just maybe, policy for nature, the nature department creates the nature policy. but the technical departments have been lacking creating policy. They've just been implementing. They've been talking to Microsoft. That's what they've been doing. So that's why I think I have a technical background, I have a civic background, and I'm bringing all that knowledge and then learning on the fly what policy making entails, which is pretty much all about common sense, I find. So, yeah.
Great. Charles?
Thank you. I'm Charles Robb, University of Edinburgh, and also the Alan Turing Institute. I want to thank the panel. I've learned a lot this morning. I have a number of detailed questions which I can take up individually with people. But what I wanted to ask was this. What I've heard this morning, I've heard about ethics, I've heard about human rights, fundamental rights, and even morals. And I've been wondering about this for quite some time because in the discourse in this area, you get those terms being bandied about. And I thought that ethics was a great thing, but then you begin to see a lot of criticism of the idea of ethics and being an ethicist because it's regarded as soft and woolly and like a marshmallow, and it doesn't have any binding teeth and so forth. What we need is to talk about fundamental rights because that's inscribed in law and so forth, and we need to push ahead on that. And I sense that there's a tension, not only in academia, but amongst NGOs and amongst people in the public and private sectors about all of this. And I think partly the notorious ethics washing that has happened has put ethics into a bad light. I want to have your view on this. When you talk about ethics and when you talk about human rights or fundamental rights, are these two separate things? Does one build upon the other? Are they mutually constructive or what? And how should we begin to tease out the good or the bad or the ugly of the relationship between ethics and human rights or fundamental rights? Thank you.
Wow. I can start if you want. There's a lot in your question. I want to respond as follows. That Yvonne said earlier that you noticed that people do not attend meetings when you have the meeting labeled ethics. But my experience is if you put on the word rights or fundamental rights, people walk away. And this is in the context of the IAMA, the assessment developed by the Utrecht Data School. I think it's really fun that it brings together all kinds of people. So the assessment is a way, a method, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mirko's in the room, Iris as well, they developed that method. It's an assessment to think about ethics and fundamental rights when you are developing or implementing AI systems. And I noticed that if you would announce it as a fundamental rights impact assessment, it will draw legal professionals, lawyers like me, and we are instructed as part of our training that our ethical thinking ends with the law, right? If the law says it's okay, you can stop thinking about the ethical implications because you have the thumbs up from the legislator. But the IAMA assessment forces you to think beyond that. So in my view, it's my opinion, so I cannot be wrong, is that I think the fundamental rights is just the baseline of what we should all adhere to, and ethics goes a step beyond that. And if you think about ethics, it produces much more interesting discussions about which route do we want to take. And Yvonne also mentioned that you, hopefully I understood you correctly, that you said you want to make the topic more political. And I think I totally agree with her. And I hope that ethics forces people to think more politically about technology.
I'll try and be brief. You're correct. There is a tension. What I find when I'm dealing with computer scientists who are learning their trade, and then also people who are working, that both ethics and human rights to them, particularly if I say the fundamental charter, they don't exactly know what that means, right? Then I have to give explanations and everything. So both of them actually, I'm finding ethics is a better vehicle to have those conversations, to open them up. we are in an interesting situation where what we're defining in Europe as ethics is getting narrowed somewhat to kind of high-level expert group definitions of priorities. And I do think that, given our backgrounds, I think we have to acknowledge the power situations and power differentials in many of these situations, and to go back to old-fashioned, for some people, political economy issues when we're talking about these, and that'll certainly bring a lot less woolliness to the conversation.
Okay, then we have time for a really quick question.
Hello, good morning. I'm Yashu. I'm from Leiden University. I'm studying law and digital tech. We heard about how lawyers have an entire organization, a law. We have more legal obligations towards their client. And we see that in the field of accountants as well. That's a similar case for them. We have chartered accountants who are like legally responsible for their clients. Olivia, do you think a similar structure might work for you interface designers, because they are playing a large role as the digital architecture is growing, and of course when it comes to user interface. So especially with respect to the attached liability, do you think this will work? Because you also mentioned that in Romania, UX designers are not considered as professionals.
Yeah, we don't exist in the job list at the States, so this is what's happening. So if I got your question correctly, you're wondering if you were asking me if in terms of designing interfaces and doing this part of the user experience design, if you think this can support with embedding ethical practices. Am I getting it right?
I'm suggesting that how we have a structure for lawyers, right?
Yes.
Let's have good training modules for designers. They
Yeah.
register, there's an organization, there's legal obligation, there's an audit.
Oh.
Maybe you sign off a platform that, yes, this
Yeah.
is ethical.
Yes, definitely. These kind of instruments really work, but we have a very more technical issue to fix. If I'm not recognized as a job, I can't go into formal training, because universities can't actually claim I'm a trained UX designer, not to mention about somebody trained into actually data privacy and so on. So I do believe that, for example, the law can really help in pushing for not necessarily standardization, but also pushing, for example, at the EU level to have all of these professions that should play a role in respecting ethics and boundaries and regulations that actually exist in the first place. And then figure out how we train them and get them from
Maybe
the
the
ground.
future then, yeah.
But yes, this should actually work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. I want to thank my very disciplined panel for the time they kept themselves. I also want to thank you for being here and asking your questions. If you still have questions, we have a flyer in the conference bag where you can find out more about our proposal. We will be around today and some of us tomorrow even, so ask us questions during the breaks and have a nice conference.
Thank you.